My son Leo left home on a gray morning that I'll never forget, and I'll never forgive the universe for letting me think it would be just another ordinary day. I prepared coffee as usual, warm bread, melted butter, the sweet smell of cinnamon that my son said he loved since he was a child. But that morning, he barely touched the plate. He just held the cup with both hands, like someone who needs to warm something much colder than their fingers. Their own souls, I sensed something was wrong, but mothers always do. The problem is, we don't always want to believe it. Mother, he said, but her voice trailed off before the sentence was finished, as if the rest of the words were too heavy to exist. I asked if there were fights, problems, debts, drugs, some unrequited love, anything that could explain the emptiness in his eyes. He just smiled, not a happy smile, a smile offerwell without explanation. He stood up, put his backpack on his back, and hugged me with a force that hurt more than any slap life could have given me. It was a hug worthy of a final chapter, not an ordinary Tuesday hug. I need to go. Where to? I can't say. Not yet. And then he left. The sound of the door closing never stopped echoing inside me. It was the most enduring sound of my life. My house was filled with silence, a vivid, cutting silence that stayed with me for 6 years, 6 years, without knowing if he was eating, sleeping, or breathing. 6 years without a good morning, Mom, without the noise of tennis being played in the living room, without his voice. I stopped living the day he left. I simply continued to exist. I used to say my marriage was stable. Not perfect, not romantic like in the movies, but stable. We paid the bills, shared responsibilities, argued over small things, and made up without grand speeches. It was a marriage of people who had seen a lot in life. But the truth is, you never really know what you've built until you see what's left when tragedy strikes. When Leo disappeared, my husband, Thomas, reacted as if someone had ripped his honor away at the root. He didn't cry. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't put his hand on my shoulder. He just stood there in the room, staring at the closed door, as if he could summon it back with the power of anger. Then he turned to me with a look I had never seen in 40 years of knowing him. "What did you do?" he asked, as if I had pushed our son out of the house with my own hands. I laughed nervously, not understanding. "What do you mean, what did I do?" "He decided to go, Thomas. He's an adult. He is your son." He cut me off. "You spoiled that boy with so many hugs, so much talking, so much weakness. Now face the consequences." That's how guilt took hold of me. Not as a question, but as a verdict. In the first few months, I tried to maintain a routine. I would wake up, make coffee, tidy the house, call hospitals, police stations, old schoolmates, anyone who might have heard of a tall, thin boy named Leo who disappeared, to think about life. Someone who disappears voluntarily leaves no trace for any mother to follow. Thomas, on the other hand, threw himself into his work. He would leave before sunrise and return when the house was already dark. He no longer told me anything. He asked me nothing. Sometimes I thought he preferred to imagine his son dead, because a dead son is a closed pain, while a missing son is a wound that never heals. At night, I would sit on the edge of the bed, waiting for him to arrive, like a wife from the 1950s. When he finally came, the smell of cigarettes and whiskey would already be there. He would silently take off his shoes, lie down, turn his back to me, and turn off the light, as if the darkness could also erase the fact that a person was missing from that bed, not as a lover, but as a consequence, a child, a piece of our pact. There was one night when I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to him and asked in a whisper, "You still think it was my fault?" He took so long to reply that I thought he had fallen asleep, but then he said, without moving, "If you had been tougher with him, he wouldn't have had the courage to leave." Those words were a silent shot. I didn't cry there. I learned to cry in the bathroom, silently, with the door locked, so as not to give him the pleasure of seeing that he was destroying me twice, as a mother and as a wife. As the months went by, the house's personality changed. Before, it was full of little noises. Music coming from Leo's room, pots banging in the kitchen, Thomas complaining about the television being too loud. Then it became a place where any noise seemed like a mistake. I walked on tiptoe. I turned off the radio. I answered the phone on the first ring, my heart in my mouth, always thinking it could be him. And it always wasn't. I was living with a stranger who wore the wedding ring I gave him, but he was no longer my husband. He spoke to me as if I were an employee who had failed at a task. Did you call the police again? Any news? Did you check if anything is missing from his room? And in all these questions there was a hidden accusation. You didn't do enough. You are to blame. You lost our son. I, on the other hand, looked at Thomas and saw a man who preferred to blame his wife rather than admit that perhaps he had failed as a father. He wanted a strong, proud, quiet son who would honor the family lineage that his father so extolled. But what he got was a boy who loved to draw, who liked to talk, who had anxiety attacks, who asked questions about the family's past that no one wanted to answer. I remember, as if it were yesterday, the day I found a box of old photos inside the office cabinet. They were black and white photos from my father-in-law's time, with serious men in formal attire, all bearing the same surname that Thomas now carried like a crown. When Leo was a teenager, he would spend hours looking at those photos, asking who they were, where they had lived, why we never saw any relatives on his grandfather's side. Thomas always responded with short sentences. They are family, and that's enough. But it was never enough for Leo. He wanted to know more, and it was this desire to know more that planted the seed for what would happen 6 years later. At the end of that first year without my son, I realized that something simple and devastating had happened. We were no longer a couple searching for a missing child. We were two different people looking for different people to blame. Thomas blamed my way of loving, I blamed his pride. And in the midst of this silent war, the real truth, the one that would come to light years later, was already haunting our house like a ghost that hadn't yet been invited to speak. There was one particular night that marked the point of no return in our marriage. I was in the kitchen, staring at my empty phone, hoping for a message that never came, when Thomas walked in, whiskey already in hand. He looked at me as if weighing my flaws on an invisible scale and uttered a phrase that tore something apart inside me. If he's dead, at least this will be over. I dropped the dishcloth on the floor. How can you say such a thing? He's your son, he shrugged. A son you pushed away from me. You made him trust you more than me. Now deal with it. At that moment, I understood that I hadn't just lost my Boyd, I had lost the man with whom I had shared decades. Not all at once, but millimeter by millimeter. Each day he chose harshness instead of genuine pain. The first year ended without a burial, without news, without a body, without a letter. But there was one death, yes, the one from our wedding. And I didn't know yet that the real reason for Leo's escape wasn't just the burden of our house. It was something much deeper, older, rotten, buried beneath generations of pride. Something that was about to be unearthed, and that it would spare no one with our last name. A year after Leo disappeared, the pain had become routine. It was no longer a shock. It was a household ghost, like that crooked picture on the wall that we never straighten because we don't even notice it's crooked anymore. But while Thomas and I tried to survive the silence, something began to change inside me. I didn't want to wait anymore. I wanted to understand. That's when I started revisiting the past, and the past doesn't like to be touched. Thomas's office was the only room in the house I avoided. It held documents, old photographs, and boxes that had belonged to his father, a man I barely knew but greatly feared. A man who spoke of blood with the same reverence others speak of God. When he died, he left Thomas a strange inheritance. Not money, not land, but a story. A story no one could question. But Leo questioned it. That's why, one early morning, while Thomas slept, drowning in whiskey, I finally entered the office. The wooden floor groaned beneath my feet, as if protesting the intrusion. Dust danced in the dim light of the lamp. The first box I found had my father-in-law's name handwritten on it, R. Whitmore, 1962, and my heart raced, but I opened it anyway. Inside were newspaper clippings, old certificates, letters, and a photo that sent shivers down my spine. It was the same photo Leo had asked about so many times, a group of serious, lined-up men, all with the same last name. But there was something new there. On the back of the photograph, written in almost faded pencil, I read a phrase that seemed like a premonition. Not all blood is what it claims to be. My stomach churned. It contradicted everything Thomas's father had claimed. The supposed family purity, the impeccable legacy, maybe it was all just a facade. What if Leo had discovered this before leaving? What if that was the reason for the leak? I trembled as I leafed through the rest of the trunk. I found a birth certificate that had been redacted, with names altered, degrees of kinship swapped, and a signature that looked forged. It was as if someone had reconstructed an entire family tree, creating roots where they never existed. Thomas's grandfather, supposedly descended from a noble lineage, might have been just an ordinary man. Or worse, someone who needed to escape his own past. My father-in-law always spoke proudly of the Whitmore surname. He said we were a family of strong blood. He would repeat that Leo should honor his blood, as if the boy had been raised to carry an invisible flag. Now, with these documents in hand, I realized that Leo had done exactly the opposite. He refused the mission. He broke the cycle. I hurriedly closed the box when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Thomas came down the stairs slowly, as if escaping a nightmare. When he saw me there, with the open box, his face changed, first surprise, then anger. "What are you doing?" I froze. "I just was looking for something by Leo." He came closer and snatched the box from my hands as if protecting a fragile treasure. "There's nothing here for you. Or for him. Never touch this again." It was the first time I noticed fear in my husband's eyes. Fear, not anger. And when someone is afraid of a box of documents, you're not dealing with history, you're dealing with a secret. After that night, the office was kept locked. Thomas carried the key with him, even to the bathroom. I pretended not to notice, but my silence worked like a shovel, digging deeper. If Thomas was protecting something, it was because that something had enough power to destroy what was already crumbling. Deep down, I knew. Leo didn't run away out of cowardice. He ran away because he discovered something that no one before him had dared to confront. But I still didn't know what. Fate, however, has strange ways of bringing the truth back home, and 6 years later, when Leo reappeared at our door, I would discover that the boy who left with only a backpack returned carrying a secret heavy enough to bring down entire generations. Until then, all I could do was wait and search among the ruins. Little did they know that even greater ruin was yet to come. 2 years had passed since Leo left, and I no longer cried every day, not because it hurt less, but because the body gets tired of dehydrating from the same emotion. Routine numbed me. I would wake up, make coffee for no one, tidy a room that wasn't used, and wait for news that never came. Then, on a quiet Tuesday, at 10:17 p.m., the phone rang. That sound, after so much time, didn't seem like a ringtone. It felt like a calling, did a finger of fate poking at a wound. I answered with my heart pounding as if it were going to burst out of my chest. "Mrs. Whitmore," the voice asked, masculine and dry. "Try. Your son was here," and my whole body became electric. "Where?" I almost screamed. "Please tell me where he is." The voice hesitated. I heard traffic in the background, horns, people talking, the living world I had forgotten existed. "A shelter for missing youths in Portland. He's no longer here, but he was. He left a name, an address, and a letter that he said should only be delivered if someone called for him." My hand was shaking so much that I could barely write down the information. Portland. Shelter. Paper. After the call, I sat on the living room floor. I couldn't get up for almost half an hour. I didn't know if I was relieved, desperate, or terrified. Everything was happening at once, like waves crashing against my chest. For 3 days, I prepared for the trip. Thomas didn't say a word, nor did he ask why. He just looked at the suitcase and said, with the coldness of someone who has chosen to feel nothing, "If he didn't want to come home, do you think he'll want to see you now?" I ignored him the first time, and that hurt him. I saw it in his eyes, more than any fight we'd ever had. I took a bus in the early morning. 14 hours on the road with my face pressed against the window, wondering if Leo was wearing a coat, if he was eating properly, if he still remembered the sound of my voice. When I arrived at the shelter, My legs could barely support my body. But I went inside. A volunteer greeted me, a woman with gray hair, a compassionate gaze, and a sweet manner. "You are his mother," that I just shook my head because if I spoke, I would cry. She handed me a white envelope, worn at the edges, but sealed. The name written by hand. "To my mother if she ever comes looking." I carried the envelope to a bench in the square across from the shelter. The sky was cloudy. The wind was cold. My hands were sweating. I opened it slowly, afraid of what I would find inside. And then I read the letter. Leo said he left because he discovered something about our family that consumed him. That he needed to get away before it swallowed him whole. That maybe he'd come back, but he couldn't promise. Then came the part that destroyed me. "Mom, if I ever come back, Leo won't be the same. I will carry with me what I have discovered, and perhaps this truth doesn't fit in any home." The letter ended with an address written in quick, almost illegible handwriting, as if he were running away even while writing. An address, a real clue, and my heart burst with hope. I returned home with the letter pressed against my chest inside my coat, as if it were my own heart beating outside of me. Thomas wasn't there when I arrived, but I found the office door unlocked, and the room was turned upside down. Open boxes, pieces of torn documents. The safe is wide open. He had seen the envelope, and he had gained access to what I shouldn't have seen in the previous chapter. For the first time, I was absolutely certain. Thomas knew more about our son's disappearance than he ever admitted. There was something rotten being protected behind that last name, something old, something dangerous. And Leo had gotten caught in the middle of it. I didn't know it yet, but this truth would not only break our family apart, that IT was going to explode. It took me almost 2 months to muster the courage to go to the address Leo left in the letter. Not for lack of wanting to. I wanted to run, cross the country if necessary, but because a part of me feared the ultimate possibility, finding him dead. Sometimes, the fear of the answer is greater than the fear of doubt. Doubt keeps hope alive. The answer can bury it. But one October morning, when the sky seemed weary and the icy wind cut like a memory, I went. IT was a simple house, made of worn wood, with peeling paint and a porch sinking like a sad smile. It didn't look like the place where my boy would have grown up, but the missing don't choose comfort, they choose anonymity. I climbed the 3 steps that groaned beneath my feet. I knocked. Once. Twice. On the 3rd knock, the door opened. It wasn't Leo. He was a man in his early 40s, with a short beard, dark eyes, and the expression of someone who knows more sleepless nights than any human should. He sized me up carefully, as if weighing words before even hearing them. "Can I help?" I couldn't answer right away. My voice got stuck in my throat. I am looking for my son. Leo Whitmore. He left this address. I held out the envelope as if it were a passport to another world. The man sighed as if recognizing a ghost. "You are," and I froze. "Do you know him?" He nodded slowly, but with eyes that spoke volumes more than the movement of his head. "He lived here for a while." "Where is he?" "Please," my voice broke, and I wasn't ashamed to show the pain. He looked away, as if searching for courage in the peeling walls. "He's gone." Again. That hit me hard, but it didn't knock me down. I was already used to falling. "Where to?" "Why?" "Was he all right? Did he mention his family?" The man raised his hand, asking for calm. "Come in. I need to show you something." My body was telling me it was dangerous, but my mother's soul screamed that only danger would bring me back to my son. I went in. The room was small, smelling of damp wood and strong coffee. On the table, there was a mug with lipstick marks, and I knew Leo wasn't as alone as I'd thought. Photos scattered about, scribbled papers, and then something that made my heart stop. A notebook, and in it, the last name, W. Moore, written dozens of times, as if he were trying to erase it simply by repetition. He didn't want to carry that name, the man said. "Why?" The answer came as cold as winter. "Because that name isn't yours, it's not his. He doesn't belong to your family." The ground disappeared beneath my feet. "Like this?" My voice came out in a broken whisper. The man took a deep breath and sat down at the table, indicating the chair opposite him. I sat there, feeling the past roll down like an avalanche. His father-in-law built that surname. He fabricated it. He bought it. He erased what came before. Leo discovered documents, real names, royal blood. He fled because he knew no one would believe him, and because those who tried to reveal it before disappeared too. My whole body went cold. Are you saying there are other missing people? That my son ran away to protect himself? His eyes met mine with the weight of raw truth. I'm not saying that. He leaned forward. I am stating this. A thick silence filled the room. I felt I was standing on the surface of something enormous, dark, and ancient, and Leo walked alone through this labyrinth. Without me, without his father, afraid.
Brave.
Then the man said the phrase that changed everything. Leo didn't disappear, he was silenced, and now he's trying to come back and destroy what his father-in-law built. My heart exploded with panic and hope at the same time. Silence does not mean dead. Silenced means alive enough to be dangerous. Where is he now? The man hesitated and finally replied. I can only tell you if you're ready to hear the rest, because the truth doesn't just destroy families, it destroys generations. And I knew then, if I moved forward, there would be no turning back, but I've never been the type of woman to back down when it comes to my children. Then I said, tell me everything. He took a deep breath, and it began. He pulled a heavy box from under the table, covered in dust and old duct tape. He cautiously placed it in front of me, like someone offering dynamite, because that's exactly what it was. Explosive. The man stared at me, searching for any last trace of doubt. When he realized I had already crossed the point of no return, he simply pushed the box toward me. That was his research. 6 years of hidden truth. My pulse quickened. Can I see? He nodded, but with the seriousness of someone handing over a weapon. Once opened, nothing will ever be the same again. I opened it slowly. Inside were yellow documents, old certificates with crossed-out names, photos of people I didn't recognize, but who carried something in their gaze that seemed familiar, like echoes of a lineage I never knew existed. The man spoke while I was flipping through the pages. Your father-in-law was born Richard Whitman, not Whitmore. He invented that last name when he arrived in the state. He altered records, bought stories, deliberately distanced himself from who he really was. That I swallowed hard. Why? His silence was answer enough, because there was something to escape, but he continued. Before becoming Whitmore, her family came from poor working-class backgrounds. Simple people, without titles, without tradition. But there was a mark, an old story about a crime committed by an ancestor. A crime that divided brothers, destroyed a village, and marked generations with shame. My stomach churned. What crime? He took a deep breath.
Blood.
His words hung in the air. Hubert Whitman, your father-in-law's great-grandfather, was accused of murdering his own brother over a land inheritance. The case was never fully investigated. There was never a confession, but the entire village believed he was guilty. He fled, changed his name, created a new lineage elsewhere, and taught all his children. Never look back. My skin crawled from head to toe. His father-in-law inherited this commandment, and she passed it on to her husband, and they tried to convey it to Leo. But Leo did the exact opposite. He went back to the past. He pulled the threads that everyone pretended not to see. And when he pulled the thread, the entire fabric began to unravel, exposing what no Whitmore wanted the world to know. That's when the man said something that left me breathless. His son discovered the forgotten descendants of his deceased brother. People who carry the true blood of the family. People who know the history. People who demand reparation. My heart was pounding. And you're saying my son got involved with them? He looked at me with something between compassion and regret. He didn't get involved, and he became the bridge, and a bridge doesn't connect without cracking the ground on both sides. I felt tears that I hadn't even realized were falling. My boy, so sensitive, so curious, found himself facing two worlds that should never have met, those who fled from the past and those who were abandoned by it. Leo not only discovered the truth, he began to rebuild what my father-in-law had destroyed. He sought out these families.
He talked to them.
He listened to buried stories. He put his hand in the fire where everyone was afraid to touch. And that's why he disappeared. It wasn't an escape. IT was a mission. But missions are expensive. Then, in a low voice and with a heavy look, the man concluded. Leo promised he would return when he had enough evidence to expose the Whitmores, and when that happened, no one of his blood would escape unscathed. My world spun. Thomas, M.Y. father-in-law, Leo, and me, all on the same falling bird. Where is he now? I repeated with a desperation I could no longer hide. He answered without looking away. In the same place where all truth dies before it is born. Where are those who want to silence, and those who refuse to be silenced? At that moment, I understood what needed to be done. I would have to follow in my son's footsteps, not as a mother, but as an ally, regardless of the risk, because blood does not mean inheritance. Blood means choice. And I would choose my son, not the past. I left that house with the box in my arms and a map in my head, because the man, after a long silence, traced for me the path Leo had taken before disappearing again. It wasn't a physical map. It was a route of scars, names of cities, people, places where he left questions and took answers. It was like following the trail of someone who had lived his life running against time. First stop, Ashford, a town of 3 streets and a train station that seemed frozen in 1950. I went there with the old photo of Leo that I carried in my wallet, already faded from so much touching. I showed it to the bar owner, the girl at the bakery, the guy at the gas station, but nobody recognized him. Until, on a park bench, a gentleman in a hat looked up and said, "The boy who draws." My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. Yes. He drew? The man smiled slightly, as if remembering something sweet and sad. He would sit there, near the tree. He would spend hours with a notebook in his lap. Always quiet. He had a way of staring into nothingness, as if he were looking inward. That was Leo. Deeply Leo. He said my son had been there for a few months, then left without saying anything, leaving behind only a notebook full of drawings. He handed it to me as if it were a relic, and when I opened it, I almost collapsed. In his notebook, Leo drew faces. Faces that repeated themselves, people who seemed different and alike at the same time, like branches of a handmade family tree. Beneath some faces, words: true, origin, blame, stolen name, blood is not destiny. I trembled. I closed the notebook gently, as if it were too fragile for the air. I continued on to the second city, Hawthorne. There I heard about a group of descendants of the brother who was murdered in the family history. They lived in isolation, distrustful, resentful. And when they found out who I was, they didn't greet me with flowers. Whitmore. A woman said, spitting out the name like venom. You let our grandparents die because of other people's guilt. You stole everything, and now you want pity? I swallowed a pride that wasn't even mine. I just want my son. Silence. And then another woman, older, observed me in profound silence. Her eyes were hard, but not cruel. Your son came here, not as an invader, but as a bridge. He listened to our story. He cried with us. He asked for forgiveness on behalf of people who never asked for it. My heart broke and was stitched back together at the same time. And what did he say next? I asked in a whisper. The woman took a deep breath. He said he was going to gather evidence, that he would return with justice, and that he couldn't love anyone while carrying this war on his shoulders. That sentence hurt like a gun buried in my chest. My son distanced himself not because he stopped loving me, but because for him, loving meant not dragging me into the fire. He burned alone. The third city was Bridgefield. There, I met a young woman who recognized Leo not by his appearance, but by his hands. He used to make coffee here. He worked quietly. He was kind that I smiled, sadly. He was always kind. She placed her hand on mine. But there was anger in him. Calm anger. Silent anger. Like someone carrying a secret too big to keep inside. I knew. I felt it. The secret wasn't just about the past, it was about the present. Regarding something Leo had seen, discovered, and confirmed, something that threatened living people, not dead ones. And then came the first real sign that my son was still breathing. The waitress pulled a folded napkin from her apron pocket. He asked me to keep it safe. He said that perhaps someone would come someday. And he asked me to give it to the woman who had his eyes. Trembling, I tore up the paper. Inside there was only one sentence and a new address. Mom, I know you'll find me. Don't stop now. Redwood, Sala 14. I cried right there, without shame, because it was the first time in 6 years that Leo had spoken directly to me. It was a request. It was a path. It was a promised reunion. And I left for Redwood with my heart on fire. But what awaited me there was not a hug. That wasn't an answer. It wasn't a rest day. It was the beginning of the final revelation. Because upon arriving in Redwood, I discovered that someone was following me. And he wanted to prevent me from meeting him. I arrived in Redwood at dusk. The sky was purple, that ominous color. The town was small, damp, smelled of pine, and there wasn't enough rain. I had the napkin with Leo's address in my hands. Redwood Inn, room 14, a rundown roadside motel, with a flashing sign and doors that creaked like ancient laments. I had the impression that the place knew I was coming, and that it didn't like it. I entered the reception area. A man with a tired expression looked at me over his glasses. Room 14? I asked bluntly. He blinked slowly, as if deciding right then and there whether he should lie or tell the truth. We haven't had guests in that room for weeks, and my breath caught in my throat. But he was here. The receptionist frowned. Who? I took Leo's picture out of my wallet. The man's eyes narrowed. And then, after a few seconds that felt like years, he simply said, Follow me. We walked down the hallway. The sound of our footsteps was swallowed by the old carpet, as if no noise wanted to survive in that building. He stopped at door number 14. The wood was scratched. Someone had tried to enter without permission. The lock was worn, as if it had been opened and closed quickly, many times. He stayed here for 3 nights. The receptionist murmured. How was he? The man hesitated. Scared, but determined. He wrote a lot. He received envelopes. He talked on the phone in the dark. And he always left the bathroom light on. My heart tightened. Leo always did that when he was scared. Did he leave anything behind? I asked, my voice breaking. The receptionist handed me a key. The room is still as he left it. Nobody cleans it. Nobody touches it. He asked that if anyone came, it should be his mother. My legs felt weak. I entered slowly, breathing as if the air were glass. And inside, Leo still existed. On the table lay an open notebook, its pages scribbled on. Maps. Lines connecting names. Circled addresses. Loose words. It's not an accident. Someone pays. The blood demands a return. I need proof. The bathroom had dim lighting illuminating the mirror. On the sink, a worn toothbrush. The toothpaste was open. A shirt hung there. His scent, that faint smell of wood and rain, still lingered in the air. It was like being with him without seeing him. And then I heard it. One click, behind me, and oh, broker. Someone was there. My body froze. I didn't turn around, I just listened. Slow, calculated footsteps. It wasn't an ordinary guest. It wasn't by chance. Someone had been following me since I arrived in Redwood, and now they were at the door of the room where Leo had been. My heart was beating so hard it seemed to betray my presence. I approached the curtain and, through a crack, I saw the silhouette. A man stood at the end of the corridor, motionless, watching. N.O. rush, N.O. face shone, like a guardian of the past. I took a deep breath, like a lioness who senses she's near her cub but surrounded by hunters. I stepped slowly into the hallway, wanting to see the stranger's face. When I stepped outside, he took a single step back into the shadows and vanished. No one disappears like that unless they already know the labyrinth. I went back to the room, closed the door, and locked it. I sat on the bed. The mattress still had the indentation from my son's weight. I placed my hand there, as if I could feel the warmth that lingered. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Under the bed, a clear plastic box. Inside, a voice tape with a handwritten label. Mom, Listen to this by yourself. My whole body trembled. I put the tape in a recorder in my room and pressed play. Then, for the first time in 6 years, I heard my son's voice. And what did he say in the first second? It made me stop breathing. If you're hearing this, Mom, it's because they've found out that I know. Silence. A.R. Denso. The world stopped. I was alone, but not without him. And that's what Leo knew, that IT was big enough for someone to chase it. And now they were chasing them, me. I pressed play, and the world became small. My son's voice filled the room. Hoarse, tired, too mature for his age. It was Leo, but not the Leo who walked out the door 6 years ago. It was a man who had seen things I couldn't even imagine existed. Mom, if you found this tape, it means I left enough clues to be followed. I didn't want to involve you, but nothing that is happening is an accident. I felt my heart leap into my throat. I continued listening, my hands cold, like someone holding a ticking time bomb. I discovered that the name Whitmore is a construct, a mask. For decades, this surname has been used to cover up an old crime and to steal the identity of the true descendants, but that's not all. The tape is broken, a sound of heavy breathing, as if he were recording in fear of being heard. Grandpa never just ran away from the blame. He ran away because someone was chasing him, someone who knew the truth. My whole body shivered. The voice continued, lower, more urgent. There is an organization, not large, but powerful, formed by the descendants of the murdered brother, the true heirs. They want justice, Mom, not in court, but in the flesh. My stomach turned. Images of Leo surrounded, pressured, used as a bridge between two worlds, the one that stole and the one that was stolen from, flooded my mind. They sought me out. I was asked to bring the Whitmore name back to where it belongs. They asked me to hand over documents, evidence, testimonials, names. I took a deep breath. I knew the outcome of that sentence even before he pronounced it. And when I hesitated, they decided to silence me. I covered my mouth to stifle a scream. The tape continued with a whisper that felt like it touched my spine directly. I don't know how long I'll be able to run away. But if you're hearing this, it means there's still a chance. They have something I can't afford to lose, something that keeps me coming back. Chiato .2 eternal seconds. And then, the phrase that changed everything. Mom, I have a son. I didn't breathe, I didn't blink, I only heard it. His name is Elijah. He doesn't carry our last name to be safe, but he's mine, and I need you to find him before they find you. My heart raced like lightning in the middle of a storm. My son had a son. My grandson existed, flesh of my blood, even without a name. And that recording wasn't just a request, that it was a delivery. Leo was passing the mission on to me. Head to Oak Ridge. Look for a woman named Marin. She knows everything. She protected Elijah when I couldn't. The tape ended with his voice breaking. Forgive me, Mother. I disappeared to protect myself. I'll only come back when I can destroy what destroyed us. Click. Silence. But inside me, nothing was silent. A new fire has broken out. I was no longer just looking for a lost son. I was looking for a hidden grandson, a living legacy, a piece of Leo that the world couldn't erase. And I would do whatever it took to find him, even if it meant confronting those who preferred our lineage dead. I stood up, with the box in one hand and the notebook in the other. I had a new destination. Oak Ridge, Marin, Elias. But as soon as I left the motel, a black pickup truck appeared on the road, too slow to be a coincidence, headlights following me. The engine is purring like a predator. It wasn't paranoia, it was persecution. And they knew that I already knew too much. I left the parking lot with my heart pounding so hard it felt like a drum inside my chest. The tape was still echoing in my ears. I have a son. It was the phrase that opened a portal within me. I had ceased to be just a mother searching for answers. Now I was the guardian of a living secret, an heir, my grandson, Elias. But the world wouldn't give me time to absorb anything. As soon as I got into the rental car and started the engine, I saw the headlights behind me turn on as well. A big car, a black pickup truck, tinted windows. The kind of vehicle that doesn't belong to ordinary people, but to people who want to intimidate. I left slowly, trying to convince myself that it could be by chance that I will turn right. They turned right. Did I hit the road? They followed as well. My whole body went into hunting mode. I never learned how to run, but motherhood instinctively teaches you everything survival requires. I gripped the steering wheel. I took a deep breath, and I accelerated. The car's engine roared against the night. The road was narrow, surrounded by trees that leaned like silent witnesses. The pickup truck behind me made the same movement, only faster. It approached. Headlights became gigantic, swallowing my rearview mirror. I knew then. They weren't following me. They were hunting me. I tried to rationalize it. If I stop, they'll catch up to me. If I speed up, I might lose control, but then I remembered Leo, a sensitive boy who faced monsters bigger than history itself. If he had the courage to carry that truth for 6 years, I could handle miles of fear. I accelerated again. I turned onto a secondary road, which was even narrower. The pickup truck accelerated along with it, without fear, or without any intention of letting me get out alive. Suddenly, the road forked. Without thinking, I steered to the left. The car skidded, kicking up dry leaves and dust. I almost hit a tree trunk, but I held firm. The pickup truck skidded behind me, but managed to keep up. It was getting closer and closer. So close that its headlights were already illuminating the interior of my car like an aggressive sun. That's when I saw, far ahead, a narrow bridge over a river. Old wood. No railings. No protection. Either I crossed the street or I died standing there. I went. The bridge creaked under the tires, crying out for mercy. Behind them, the pickup truck also moved in, but with more weight, with more speed. And then something happened. The wood began to give way. I heard the crack, like a bone breaking. Speeding across the bridge seconds before it began to collapse, I glanced in the mirror and saw the pickup truck brake sharply, but it was too late. The wood broke under the weight. The vehicle tipped over onto its side. Half of it hung in the void, like a wounded animal. I didn't wait to see if they managed to get out. I just kept driving until I found solid ground, until I finally stopped the car with trembling hands and my chest heaving as if I'd been running for a century. Then I understood the magnitude of what I was facing. It wasn't family jealousy. There was no shame in the past that IT was not a dead story. It was war. I rested my head on the steering wheel, took a deep breath, and felt a new strength emerge from within. Not just courage, purpose. I had a destiny, a grandson who needed me, and a son who entrusted his legacy to my hands. Oak Ridge was still a long way off, but I was no longer alone. I was accompanied by the echo of my son's voice, and by the certainty that, if they tried to silence me on that bridge, it was because I was on the right path. And the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. But now there was no choice that I would go all the way, even if the end came to find me first. Oak Ridge wasn't a city. It was a place where time moved differently. The streets seemed suspended between yesterday and today. The windows had thick curtains, as if the residents kept secrets behind them. And I arrived unannounced, because whoever carries a burning truth doesn't knock politely. They enter, breathe, search. The address on the tape led me to a light blue house with a neglected garden and children's toys buried in the weeds, like tiny fossils. There were bicycle tracks on the sidewalk, an overturned plastic bucket, and there, on the clothesline, a small yellow jacket drying in the wind. Child size 0.5 years, maybe Elias's age. My heart couldn't take it. It pounded so hard my hands trembled when I rang the doorbell. 2 seconds. 4. 8. Silence. I was about to ring again when I heard the sound of small footsteps running inside the house. Then another. Adult, slower, more cautious. The door opened. A woman appeared, dark-haired, with a firm gaze, an expression of someone who had seen pain and refused to be broken by it. Marin. I knew her even before hearing the name. She didn't ask who I was. She knew. You are Leo's mother. Not a phrase, a statement. I simply nodded, because any words I tried to say would turn into tears. She looked at me for a long 5 seconds, weighing whether I was a threat or salvation. Then she opened the door wider. between. She led me through the room, simple, welcoming, with children's drawings stuck to the wall and a bicycle leaning against the sofa. A home that still breathed life, despite the fear I sensed in the air. I sat down without asking permission, because I wasn't a visitor. It was destiny following its route. I took a deep breath. "Where's my grandson?" Marin stared at me like someone assessing a bridge before crossing it. "Do you love your child?" "With every part that exists within me." "Then you will understand that sometimes loving means hiding." Those words hit me hard in the chest. She continued, "Leo entrusted Elias to me because he knew he couldn't protect him while battling his own history. He carried more than guilt. He carried a broken blood legacy. Does Elias know who I am?" "Not yet," Marin sighed, tired. "He only knows his father as a kind shadow. A story whispered before bedtime. A voice that promised to return." I swallowed my tears like someone swallowing a knife. "I want to see him," I whispered. Marin hesitated. She walked into the hallway, slow, careful steps. The air grew thick. She opened a door at the end. And then there he was, a small boy, with straight brown hair like his father's when he was a child, eyes too big for his face, carrying the same curious silence that Leo carried at age 5. My grandson. He held a rag doll and watched me calmly, without fear, as if he knew I belonged there even though he had never seen me. And when he smiled, even shyly, I felt something violently reborn inside me. Not joy. Not relief. Belonging. Blood doesn't need a last name to recognize its own blood. I took a step. Another one. He tilted his head, a gesture identical to the one Leo made when he thought before speaking, and said, in a small voice that almost melted my heart, "Do you know my father?" My eyes filled with tears. "I am his mother." He gave a small, shy smile, as if a piece of the world had finally fallen into place. But before I could hug him, Marin placed her hand firmly on my arm. "There are things you need to know before you take Elias away from here." I turned to her, trembling. "Who is trying to stop us?" Marin's eyes darkened. "The family that should be your ally." Silence, cold air. Then she finished slowly. "Her husband's family, those who inherited the stolen name, they don't want Elijah to exist." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. My own blood, my own house, my own past. It was from them that Leo was running away. It was them I was supposed to protect our future from. From that moment on, I understood. I wasn't just looking for Leo. I was at war with a name I had carried for decades without knowing its price. And Elias was the prize, or the ultimate victim. The revelation came crashing down on me like a storm. My husband's family, my husband included, didn't want Elias alive. Not because there was no connection, but why he was the thread that unraveled all the lies. He was living proof that true blood existed, outside of the Whitmore name, far from the invented lineage. And every empire built on lies fears its own truth. That night, Marin made tea while Elias slept in the next room. I heard him breathe, small, fragile, whole. The most precious sound that ever existed. I wanted to run over there, hug him, protect him tooth and nail. But before that, I needed to know who had come to destroy him. Who exactly is behind him? Marin rested her hands on the table, as if she had been holding too much weight for too long. His father-in-law started the cover-up. I know. But it was the next generation that carried on the legacy. Her husband, her brothers-in-law, all those who inherited the advantage of that name. My chest tightened. Thomas, the man with whom I shared a bed, a life, a son. Would he do that to his own grandson? I didn't want to believe it, but the heavy silence said yes. Marin continued, firmly. They believe that Elias will reclaim the name that gives them power, that he will expose the past, that he will demand reparations. And they would rather erase the boy than lose the throne that was never theirs. That I felt something being born inside me. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was fury. I stood up slowly. Nobody touches my grandson. Marin watched me for long seconds, and in that instant, she realized. I was no longer the broken woman who had arrived there looking for answers. I was a guardian now, bearer of fire. But the night still held poison in store. Because at 1:28 a.m., the silence was broken. A beat, firm, rhythmic, not of a visitor, but of an invasion. 3 knocks on the door, strong enough to awaken the entire past. Marin and I exchanged glances. Not a word, just understanding, and genuine fear this time. She ran to the room, picked Elias up in her arms. He was fast asleep, innocent of the chaos. I went to the window and saw what I had already feared. A car parked on the other side of the street, headlights off, engine running, the sound of human breathing through the glass. And then, a male voice, deep and cold, echoed from outside. "Open the door. He belongs to the family." My blood ran cold. That it was a voice I recognized. Thomas, my own husband. Behind him, shadows point 3 men, the attitude of someone who didn't come to talk, but to take. Marin looked at me urgently. "We need to leave through the back door. But they are armed, and we have what they want," she said, pressing Elias against her chest. 3 hits again, more aggressive this time. Bam, bam, bam. I felt the maternal instinct consume me entirely. Fear turned to fire, and my hands stopped shaking. I approached Elijah. I touched his head with a gentleness that concealed steel. "I swear on everything I own, nobody can take you away." The boy opened his eyes, silent like his father, and looked at me with a confidence I didn't deserve, but would receive nonetheless. The door shook again under the impact. They were going to break in. Marin pulled me by the arm, guiding me toward the kitchen. A small, almost invisible door led to the backyard. She opened it slowly, but before we could go through, I heard Thomas's last words from the other side of the wall. "If you don't hand over the child, we'll burn the house down with you inside." Marin and I exchanged a look that spoke louder than 1,000 words. We weren't running away. We were saving the future. And that morning, we crossed the back door with Elias in our arms, running in the darkness like someone carrying the last piece of a true lineage. But I knew that was only the first attempt. Thomas would not back down, the family would not forgive, and Leo, wherever he was, must have already known that the siege had begun. I was no longer a seeker, that I was a target. And now came the most dangerous chapter. Open warfare, the declared persecution, and the inevitable reunion, with my son, and with the blood that we wanted to hide. We ran through the darkness like someone fleeing an invisible fire, and in a way we were, because fire isn't just flames. Fire is pursuit. Fire is blood claiming blood. And that dawn, I felt the heat of destruction behind us, even without yet seeing the flames. Marin held Elias with the protection of a she-wolf. I followed behind, making my way through branches and roots, while the sound of the men at the door grew louder and more violent. We heard the wood creak, then the sound of entry, footsteps invading the house that had once been a refuge. "Run faster," Marin whispered, her voice firm but faltering at the edges. We followed the narrow path behind the plot of land, which led to a dense, damp forest, where the ground creaked and the air smelled of cut pine and an impending storm. There was no light except for the moon filtering through the leaves. But our steps knew the way, guided by the ancestral instinct that awakens when life depends on it. That's when we heard the first threat become action. One shot. The sound exploded through the night like thunder. The birds took flight in despair. Elias trembled in Marin's arms, but he didn't cry. He carried his father's silence within him. The second shot came from closer. Pa, pa. The bullet hit a tree a few meters from us. I felt pieces of bark fly, whipping my face. It was a warning. They didn't want to scare us. They wanted to hit us. "To the river," Marin ordered. "Are you familiar with this route?" "I know the escape route better than you think." We ran down the slope, our feet sinking into the mud, our breaths short, our lungs burning. I could hear the footsteps behind us, more than 3 men now. They spread out like experienced hunters, breaking through the encirclement. They were trained, calculated, not amateurs, not improvising. My husband's family wouldn't send ordinary men. "Mother." The word struck me like lightning because it did not come from Elijah. It came from the forest. I stopped so abruptly that I almost felt a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, thin, with the same gaze that embraced me 6 years ago at our last breakfast. Leo. My SONDMY boy. Whole, but with eyes scarred by war. I wanted to run to him, to hug him until time healed, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. The sound of pursuers was getting closer. There was no room for affection. There was no luxury of reunion. Love had to wait to survive. Go this way, he whispered, pointing to the river. And you? I asked, afraid that fate would tie us together again. I lure them to the other side. Marin understood before I did. Leo was Iska, Elias was the target. He approached his son for the first time and touched his face with hands that trembled as if in prayer. Elias looked at him with astonishment and recognition that genetics explains without explanation. Okay? That word was both knife and cure at the same time. Leo swallowed his tears, a man trained by pain, and kissed the boy's forehead. I'll be back. Promise? With life. And then he did the impossible. He walked away. She turned toward the darkness where the men were approaching and ran toward them, like someone determined to fight their own shadow. We fled in the opposite direction. I looked back only once and saw the scene that will be etched in my memory until the last second of my existence. Leo stopping in the clearing, raising his arms, calling the men. It's me you want, leave the boy alone. And they went, like wolves guided by the scent of the alpha. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to him. But Marin pulled me back with the strength of a survivor. If you come back, 3 of us will die. If you run, we'll save one. The choice no mother wants to make, but that war demands. I ran, with Elias in my lap now, with a heart divided into 2 bodies. And as the forest swallowed the sound of gunfire and the distant confrontation, I understood. My battle was no longer just about finding Leo. My battle now was bring him back alive. And to do that, I would need to confront the person who bore my last name. I would need to break the bloodline before it broke my blood. I needed to become the enemy of the family that was my family. And I was ready. We ran until dawned. I carried Elias while Marin cleared a path through the woods with the memory of someone who has studied escape routes, like someone studying the alphabet. With each step, the certainty burned stronger inside me. The lineage I was supposed to protect had become the hunter, and Leo had offered himself as prey to save his own son. As the sun rose, we reached an abandoned cabin near the river. Low ceiling, the smell of old wood, windows with torn curtains. A forgotten place, perfect for rekindling hope. Marin locked the door, barricaded it with chairs, and pushed the table against the entrance. It was the kind of makeshift shelter that only exists when there is a real threat. Elias slept in my lap, exhausted, his breathing too calm for the chaos surrounding us. I watched him and saw Leo as a child, the same one who used to say, "Mom, look at my drawing." He was the same one who believed the world had answers for those who asked enough. My son never ran away. He went after the truth. And now I understood the weight of that search. When the boy was fast asleep, Marin sat down in front of me, not as a guardian, but as an accomplice. You need to know exactly what Leo discovered, she said. I know about the ancestors' murder. About the false lineage. About the family that wants to erase the past. Marin shook her head slowly. That's just the surface. The reason is much bigger than a name. My chest tightened. So, what is really at stake? The revelation came like an earthquake. Your father-in-law not only falsified the name, he stole land, titles, money, and most importantly, political power. She opened an old backpack. Inside, folders marked with dates, stamps, signatures. Evidence. The Whitmore name has become a symbol of influence. A dynasty built on crime. And what Leo found were documents that prove it and that point to living beneficiaries. My husband. Try. And his brothers. Try. I felt nauseous. The family I trusted, with whom I shared meals, birthdays, Christmases, sustained their very lives on spilled blood. Not just an old crime, an entire system of power maintained at the expense of those who should have inherited what was stolen. Leo was under pressure. Marin continued. The true lineage wanted justice. His family wanted silence. He stood in the middle, a bridge between two sides that wanted one of them to fall. A whisper escaped me. He was left alone. Until now, Marin corrected. And then she handed me a folder filled with papers that felt like physical weight. Here's everything. The complete proof. Leo put all of that together, but he hasn't given it to anyone yet because he knew they would kill him before he could expose it. I took a deep breath, slowly, deeply, feeling the weight of centuries fall into my hands. There were old wills there, original certificates, illegal transactions, fictitious companies linked to the Whitmore name, and a final list, handwritten with 4 names. Richard Whitman, father-in-law, founder of the fraud. Thomas Whitmore, my husband, successor and benefactor. Samuel Whitmore, brother-in-law, silent executor. Leo Whitmore, heir, traitor to the pact. And next to it, written as annoying, Elias, the true heir. Marin looked at me like someone placing a sword in the hand of someone who has never fought, but needs to. They don't want to kill Leo out of hatred. They want to prevent Elijah from growing in stature, because he is living proof of the truth. My blood ran cold, and my body burned. And then I understood the plan. To save Leo, I would need to destroy the Whitmore bloodline, name by name, test by test, truth for truth. Marin continued, her voice firm. Leo is alive, but not for long. They're going to interrogate him, torture him, if necessary. He knew this. He expected you to reach this point. And where is he? I whispered. She opened the final map, marked in red with 3 circles. They took him to Hawthorne, the place where it all began, the family's hideout, the last nest bearing the Whitmore name. My heart didn't tremble this time, he agreed. And I said, let's go get him. And oh, matter the cost. Marin smiled sadly, relieved and amazed. You finally understood. It's not Leo who needs rescuing. It is the lineage that needs to be freed. She placed Elias on my lap, trusting the future to my hands. You and I are going to invade Hawthorne, that we're going to expose everything, and we're going to get Leo out alive. And for the first time since he disappeared, I felt something stronger than just longing. I felt purpose. It was open war now, and I was no longer the mother waiting by the phone. I was the mother who marches into the fire. Planning my son's rescue was like drawing a map with my own fear. Every step could be my last. But the risk no longer paralyzed me. It propelled me forward. The truth wasn't just something to discover. Now it was a weapon. And the 2 of us, Marin and I, were about to use it. We spent 2 days holed up in the cabin preparing everything. Marin showed us what Leo had left behind. Secret routes, names of lookouts, patrol schedules, flaws in the surveillance system. He wasn't just a researcher, he became a strategist. For 6 years, Leo used his disappearance as camouflage. While the world thought he was running away, he was getting closer. While we searched for him, he investigated every living Whitmore. He was not lost, he was preparing for the fall. And now, with Elias sleeping beside me and the map on the table, I could clearly see my destination. Hawthorne, the old Whitmore mansion, the iron nest of legacy. The house where the name was first forged, and where they were now holding my son. Marin explained the plan with military calm. We entered through the abandoned greenhouse. Side entrance, no cameras. The mansion has 3 wings. Leo is in the north wing, the basement. I'll handle the invisibility. You handle the contact. Contact. She placed the gun on the table. My blood ran cold, but my hands did not retreat. They will kill your son if you hesitate. Silence between us. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of the point of no return. I grabbed the gun. Marin smiled with what seemed like a bittersweet pride. From this moment on, you are no longer part of the Whitmore lineage. You are the disruption to her. In the early hours of the 3rd day, with Elias safe under the protection of a trusted family, we set off. The sky was as black as coal, moonless, the kind of night darkness chooses as its accomplice. The mansion loomed before us like a sleeping monster, enormous, cold, and arrogant. Window by window, it seemed to watch our approach with disdain. The greenhouse Leo had pointed out was there, covered in moss, broken glass, dead flowers growing silently. A hideout within a hideout. We entered silently, soft steps, measured breath. Marin opened the panel that concealed the underground passage. Leo had marked the way with a discreet symbol, a tiny L scratched into the wood. My son left a clue for me. He believed I would arrive. We went down. The hallway was damp, narrow, lit by cold lamps that trembled like unresolved memories. The sound of my footsteps was faint, but the beating of my heart was loud. I smelled iron, dried blood, rotten history. We turned the last corner, and there it was, an iron door, thick, locked, protecting something more valuable than gold. Behind her, human breaths point one in particular, known as the old song in my heart. Leo, I whispered without having a voice. Marin positioned herself, alert. I touched the door with trembling hands. There was no more if, only when. Then I heard a low voice, weak, but alive. Mother? My soul has left me. It's me, my son. I've come to get you to brief silence, like a restrained prayer. You shouldn't be here, he whispered. They will return. And then, before I could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Quick. Determined. Many. Marin grabbed my arm. They found us. I turned to the door, my blood pulsing like an ancient war, and said to Leo with the certainty of someone who has already lost and will not lose again. I'm not coming back without you. The shadows doubled down the corridor, flashlight beams blinded us. Armed men advanced. And the chapter ended with the sound that divides worlds. The first shot of the final war. The sound of the first shot ricocheted through the underground corridor, and I, who had spent 6 years waiting for answers, now found myself responding with fire. Marin pulled me for cover, behind a concrete pillar, while 3 men emerged around the corner with flashlights and rifles aimed to kill, not to intimidate. The air smelled of gunpowder, metal, and fear, but fear no longer dictated my steps. It only reminded me that I had something to lose. And I wouldn't lose again. Marin fired first, dry, precise, taking down the man at the front of the group. The sound echoed like thunder inside old tunnels. I trembled, not from weakness, but from a strength I was still learning to use. When another of them advanced, I did what I never thought I was capable of. I aimed and pulled the trigger. The recoil hurt my shoulder. The impact struck the man in the chest, and my whole body went cold when I saw him fall. I had just crossed a border from which there is no return, but mothers don't go back. They move forward. The shots continued, dry sounds against stone. Marin pushed me toward the door, where Leo was. Find the key. Free him. I'll hold the hallway. It was a phrase that sounded like a pact. I dragged myself to the door as the gunfire cast jagged flashes in the darkness. My fingers trembling, but my mind steady, I began to search through the fallen bodies. In the last one's pocket, I found it. The key. My hands, still dirty with gunpowder, turned the metal on the padlock. The click sounded like birth. The door opened with a long, old groan. The dim light fell on Leo. He was thin, marked, but standing up. He looked at me as if he were seeing 1,000 lives at once. You came, and my voice broke between love and anger. It took me 6 years, but yes. Now, let's go. He emerged from the cell, leaning against the walls, his body weak but his eyes fierce, like a man who had been beaten but had not yielded. And before I could embrace him, the sound I feared, but had hoped for, resonated at the end of the corridor. Heavier steps, but firms, less rushed. A man appeared from the shadows. Thomas, my husband, my tormentor, the boy's father, whom I was now protecting from him. He didn't point a gun immediately. She looked at Leo with a mixture of contempt, pain, and sick pride. You should have accepted what you inherited, he said in a deep voice. I inherited nothing, Leo replied. I refused to lie. Thomas then turned his eyes to me, and I saw there the final judgment. You chose the wrong side too, and I took a deep breath. Years of submission, silence, and guilt burned like paper inside my chest. I chose the truth. The silence that followed was as heavy as a lifeless body. Then Thomas raised his weapon, and the world shrank in a split second. Leo positioned himself in front of me as a reflex, but Marin appeared behind them like lightning, weapon in hand. The shot came, loud, violent, and echoed for generations within that room. Thomas fell on your knees, slow, heavy, inevitable. Not dead, but brought down, like a tower of power that finally met its equal. Breathing stopped in the hallway. The remaining men fled, with no commander to obey, and for 30 seconds, the silence was so profound that I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ear. Leo turned to me, his eyes glistening with tears that didn't ask permission. They just poured down. I finally hugged him. 6 years of emptiness compressed into an encounter that lasted seconds, but healed ages. I felt bones, I breathed him in, I recognized the sun and the man. It was an embrace that said, I lived for this moment, and I will survive the next ones. But the moment was not final, that he was the beginning. Because Leo, panting on my shoulder, whispered the phrase that burned the air. There is still one last truth missing, the darkest of them all. I stepped back to face him. Which? He looked at his father's unconscious body on the floor. Then for me. Then for the future that beat in the chest of the grandson, who felt it even though he wasn't there. And he said, Thomas didn't try to kill us just for power. He tried because the murdered brother wasn't the ancestor. IT was ours, that IT was blood that gave rise to us. We are the stolen branch, not the original. I lost my breath, not out of fear, for something bigger. We were the imposters, and Elijah was the rightful heir, unique and last. The lineage didn't need to be exposed. IT needed to be returned. And the next step was not escape, that IT was a return. The ultimate truth would not destroy the family. She would reorganize the blood. With fire, yes, but fairly. We emerged from the basement with Leo leaning on my arm and Marin in front, her sights clear. A hunter now choosing the right side of history. The mansion was partially empty, but not harmless. When an empire begins to crumble, those who remain become more dangerous, because they don't defend power. They defend despair. Thomas was unconscious, but alive. Leo made sure of that. I didn't come here to kill, he said. I came to reveal. And that was the difference between us and them. They wanted to hide it with death, we wanted to display it with light. We followed the corridors to the main hall, the heart of Hawthorne. It was there that invented generations toasted the stolen surname. There that decisions were made in the shadows. There that the pain began, and there that it would end. And as we walked, Leo spoke, without pause, without hiding. Grandfather Whitman killed his own brother, but he didn't flee solely out of guilt. He fled because he knew the other brother had inherited the right, not him. Marin walked beside her, completing the story. The true branch grew in silence, poor, forgotten, but legitimate. And when they discovered the deception, they vowed to reclaim what had been taken. I took a deep breath. But we are descendants of the murderer. Leo firmly denied it.
No.
The son who ran away and assumed another identity was the innocent one, not the guilty one. The story was twisted to protect the real criminal. The revelation dawned on me like a flash of light. We were never imposters, we were victims of an inherited lie. Elias was not the wrong heir, he was the rightful heir, the only legitimate one of the entire lost lineage. When we arrived at the hall, the doors opened like a theatrical finale. There they were, the true descendants, the men who chased Leo, those who wanted Elijah, legitimate blood, wounded but strong. And at the center, like a Roman judge in an ancient court, Samuel Whitmore, M.Y. brother-in-law. The man had cold eyes and hands that were too clean for the filth he was carrying. He opened his arms like the host of a macabre banquet. The family returns home. Marin raised her weapon, but Leo grabbed her wrists. He didn't want fire to end things. He wanted words. You hunted us down because you knew Elijah was the heir. Samuel smiled, but it was a snake's smile. The child is the key. He carries the right that was taken from us. But you are the crooked branch of the tree. You don't deserve the surname. Leo took a step forward. Even weak, even broken, with the look of someone who had already seen rock bottom and returned with a match in hand. We don't want a last name, Samuel blinked, confused. Leo added. We want the truth, and we want to return the lineage to whom it belongs. Elias is not a choir. He is justice. Silence. Deep. Unbreathable. Marin stepped forward. We have proof, documents, certificates, confessions, illegal transactions. We have the whole story, said Leo. And we're going to deliver it to the world. Samuel laughed, but his laughter lacked conviction. You are in the minority that I took a step. The first one in my life as a woman that doesn't bow down. But we are right. It was the beginning of the final showdown. And the air became so thick it seemed flammable. If words could solve anything, it would all end there. But stories involving blood never end in conversation. They end up in destination. And in that room, we knew that either the truth would survive, or we would fall with it. The hall was a stage, and we were pieces that finally decided to move on one side, the rightful heirs, wounded by history, but burning with right on the other side, the fake Whitmore family, sustained by fear, silence, and a stolen inheritance, the center. Leo, the remnant and rebirth of a lost lineage, and me, who for 6 years searched for a son without knowing I was about to find him, an entire legacy. Samuel took the first step, slow, deliberate, deadly. The silence was so profound that I could hear my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. Do you think you can give back the power? He said. Power is not inherited. It is sustained. Leo took a deep breath and replied like a man who had carried death in his heart without dying. So, keep yours in the light. Marin opened the folder and spread out the documents Leo had collected over 6 years onto the central table. Original certificates, old confessions, hidden letters, receipts linking the Whitmore name to identity theft, the complete trail of ancestral theft. Each piece of paper was a knife, each seal, a door opening a wound. Some of the men tried to stop him, but they stopped when Leo raised the recorder he was holding. In it, voices, names, confessions, negotiations to erase evidence. Samuel paled. Thomas, waking up on the ground, could only stare, defeated like a fallen tower. Leo then did what none of us expected. I don't want revenge, he said. I want compensation. He turned to the rightful heirs, those who had been invisible for decades, and, for the first time in his life, my son spoke not as a victim, but as a bridge that refuses to break. The Whitmore name will not be inherited by my son. He will be buried here. Elias will carry only what is true. Marin nodded, her chin firmed. I felt my whole body heat up, as if centuries of lies were finally being incinerated. Unable to argue, Samuel stepped forward in a final, proud gesture, but Leo didn't back down. In a low voice, but with his spine straight, he said, You can keep the name, but never again the power. A long moment, holding their breaths, entire lives in limbo. Then, the true descendants, silent until then, stepped forward, not with weapons, with testimony, with acceptance. They accepted Elijah as the rightful heir, not for the blood that steals, but for the blood that corrects. The war ended there, not because we won through fear, but because the truth won through sheer force. Thomas tried to get up, but he fell again. The story he tried to protect crushed his moral backbone. I looked at him, without anger, without love, without pity. I don't hate him, I said, but I will never follow you again. He looked away. He had nothing left to say. We left Hawthorne at dawn. This time, the sky wasn't an omen. It was healing. Elias ran to Leo, small, but whole. He opened his arms, and my son, for the first time in 6 years, smiled without pain in the corner of his eyes. They hugged, father and son, origin and future. The tree was finally planted where it should have been. I approached, and Elias extended his small, confident hand. Leo put my hand inside his. 3 generations aligned with truth, not name, new blood, clean blood, restored blood. I looked at the horizon and understood what 6 years of searching had truly meant. I didn't lose my son, but I lost a bloodline. To win another, real one. The Whitmore name was buried that day, not with a tombstone, but with light. And Elijah, He will not inherit power. He will inherit history, the whole thing without lies. Leo took a deep breath, as if finally resting within his own body. Let's go home, Mom Dai smiled and replied. Now we can go. The past is in ruins, but the future was walking beside me, alive, small, smiling. The blood, at last, returned to its rightful place.